But I noticed something that all of us need to take note of, is that even though there are many people, and you might be watching online, you might be here, and you might be one of the people that feel this way, or actually live your Christian life this way. And that is, I found that many people, it's easier for them to believe and to expect that they can't really receive the favor of God. They know God favors them. They know the gospel says that God favors them. But it's like they don't expect the favor of God. And they don't expect and believe that God could favor them. But instead, they find it easier to believe and to expect that God's disfavor or God's scrutiny, that they tend to still feel like, yes, God, He wants to favor me, but He can't because my life is not the way it ought to be or it should be. I'm not doing, a lot of people say, well, I'm not doing what I feel God has called me to do. Maybe many people feel, well, I'm not doing it because I can't, because of whatever reason. And so they rather believe and expect the scrutiny of God, that God is constantly scrutinizing them in order to get them to a place of favor. Now, there's nothing, and I think that, those of you that know me and you've listened to a lot of what I teach, you maybe have heard me say this before, but there's nothing that causes more emotional pain and mental anguish, instability in a person's life than the expectation of disfavor, the expectation of scrutiny, that somebody is scrutinizing and looking into your life to find and pry and find something wrong in your life. There's nothing that's more damaging than the idea of retribution, especially when it comes to the judgment of God. Mental institutions is filled with people who claim to be believers, born again, some spirit-filled believers, and they are locked up in mental institutions. In fact, many years ago, I don't know what the statistics are now, but I would say the statistics I'm looking at was like in the late 90s, that here in America, 72% of people in mental institutions confess to be born-again believers. 72%. Barner, I think it was one of Barner's statistics that he showed. And many of those people are emotionally suffering and in mental, instability, mental instability in their lives. Some of them totally paralyzed and can't function in life because they actually believe that they've committed some sin, or they've done something that God can't really forgive them, or God won't forgive them. And they live with the expectation constantly of God's anger and wrath, and that God's going to get them. In fact, I was reading, I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was something that I read that Andrew Womack said, that he, it wasn't. It was Brother Hagin. Brother Hagin, you guys familiar with Kenneth Hagin? I remember Brother Hagin saying this, and I've read it in one of his books, where he said that he had somebody that came to his church who was the director of a mental institution. He was the guy that ran the mental institution. And so he was talking to this gentleman, and this gentleman was saying to him that one of the reasons in that particular mental institution is that they won't allow people to come in there. So if pastors come there to visit people there, they won't allow them to come in with a Bible. They won't allow them to carry a Bible openly in the institution. And Brother Hagin was saying that he asked him, he said, well, why is that? He said, are you against the Bible or what? And he said, no, we're not against the Bible. It's just that the people that are in the mental institution, the patients there, if they see, some of them, if they just see a Bible, it absolutely torments them, and many of them will just, manifest. And then it takes the doctors and the nurses, it takes a long time for them to calm them down and get them, to a place where they... And I don't know about you guys, but for me, that's like, wow. That is terrible. Now, thank God none of us in this place right now, we're not in a mental institution. But sometimes there are churches, and in churches there are many people who live with tremendous emotional insecurities, all kinds of fears and phobias and anxiety. Anxiety is one of the greatest conditions in the modern society. Is that people suffer tremendously with all kinds of anxiety. And a lot of it is because, I believe, that we don't have a good perspective of who God is and how He sees us and how He ministers to us and who He is in our lives. But the good news, this is the good news. The good news of the gospel declares that Jesus is a faithful high priest. Hebrews chapter 2, and you can turn there with me if you want to. Hebrews chapter 2. And we're going to just go and have a look at a passage of scripture there in Hebrews chapter 2. And I'm going to read it out of the King James, and then we'll also read it out of the Amplified Classic. But Hebrews chapter 2 says that Jesus is a faithful high priest, and He has delivered us from the fear and the terror of death. And that's such a powerful truth to understand. Now, Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, the King James says, "For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, He also Himself likewise took part of the same, that through death He might destroy him who had the power of death, that is the devil." So, first thing I would like to draw your attention to here is the fact that this tells us that if this is where people are in their relationship with God, believers, and that so many of us as believers have lived either with some kind of low intensity fear and anxieties and all kinds of phobias and in our relationship with God, to the extreme of those who even end up in a mental institution, that we know that the enemy is the one behind it. Because it tells us here that Jesus, when He came, for as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, He Himself likewise took part of the same, that through death He might destroy him who had the power of death. I love that is the devil. He had the power. Now, Did he have the power? The power of death, I believe the enemy had, is the ability to instill fear in people when it comes to their relationship with God. Because look at verse 15. It says, and deliver them. So he says, first of all, he destroyed him who had the power of death, which is the devil, and deliver them who through the fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. Now, I'm going to read this out of the Amplified Classic. The Amplified Classic says, since therefore these his children share in flesh and blood in the physical nature of human beings, he himself in a similar manner partook of the same nature, that by going through death, let's say that together, going through death, because this is going to be a key in this teaching. By him going through death, he might bring to naught and make of no effect him who had the power of death. Who is that? The devil. And also that he might deliver and completely set free all those who through the haunting fear of death were held in bondage throughout the whole course of their lives. Wow. So it tells us two things, that Jesus, and the writer of Hebrews is saying that Jesus, by going through death, he destroyed the power of the enemy, which was the accusations that so many of us will believe all the time about God's scrutiny upon our lives. And by doing so, he has now delivered, and I like the Amplified Classic, he has delivered and completely set free. He's not just delivered and give you some freedom, but he has completely set free all those who through the haunting fear of death were held in bondage throughout the whole course of their lives. See, Jesus delivered us from the bondage of, and he calls it the haunting fear of death. Now, if you look at the original language, that you realize very quickly that it's not just talking about the fear of one day physically dying and laying this body down. To a certain degree, that's part of it. But what's more important here is that the haunting fear of death is the fear of dying by means of terror. It is the fear of, yes, dying and laying down, but through terror, torment, through torture, especially when it comes to the wrath and the anger of God. So what this tells us is that Jesus, by going through death as a human being, becoming a human being and going through death, and of course that includes at the end of it all the resurrection, he has delivered us. He's done something that if we would believe it, it will set us free from ever fearing the wrath, the anger, the disfavor of God in any way. That's powerful to understand. It really is powerful to understand. I mean, if you want to, I want us to go and just bring some other verses and other scripture into to kind of complement what I'm saying here.